And welcome to another edition of the Hank Unplugged podcast, a podcast that is committed to bringing the most interesting, informative, and inspirational people directly to your, I like to say your earbuds, but anyway, I want you to be able to really focus on these very exceptional people. And there seem to be no end to how many wonderful women today are writing books. Today on the podcast, another exceptional woman, Carrie Gress. She's a fellow at the Washington, D.C.-based think tank Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's a scholar at the Institute for Human Ecology. She's a doctorate in philosophy. She's the editor at the online women's magazine Theology of Home. She's the author of 10 books, and I am really excited about a book that my son David put into my hands and said, "Dad, you have to read this book." It's titled The End of Woman. I mean, this is an intriguing title, The End of Woman. It's subtitled How Smashing the Patriarchy Has Destroyed Us. And in this book, I don't usually read from the flap cover of a book, but I do want to read a few excerpts from the inside front and inside back cover flaps. Feminism doesn't empower women. I mean, that's an incredible statement, because most people, when they hear the word feminism, they hear it through a very positive filter or lens. But Carrie says that feminism doesn't empower women, it erases women. After 50 years of radical feminism, we can't even define woman. Feminism has served to abolish women. And then this sentence, hulking trans women are trashing female athletes. Women are aborting their baby girls. Drag queens are now performing obscene parodies of women. And still feminists cling to their illusions of liberation. Carrie Gress is a wife, she's a mother, she's a philosopher, and she, in this book, The End of Woman, she punctures the myth of feminism. And she says that only a rediscovery of true womanhood can pull our society back from the brink. For feminism's victims, Gress is a welcoming voice in the darkness as she answers the quintessential question, who is responsible for murdering the wonder of womanhood? Carrie, I am truly honored to have you on the podcast. I always tell people you have to read a book 3 times to really own the material. And the way I do it, and I repeat this not to draw attention to myself, but I hope people get in this habit. The first time I read through a book, I sort of speed read it. The second time, I underline it with a pentel, and third time, I use a magic marker, a highlighter, I should say. And that's the way I own the material. And I think I got this from C.S. Lewis. He said, you have to read a book 3 times to really master its contents. But this is a book that's really worth mastering, and it's a timely book. And I am just delighted and proud to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you. I'm really moved by your introduction. So I really appreciate being here.
Well, you're absolutely amazing. You talk about the vulnerability of women. I want you to elaborate on that to begin the podcast.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful place to start because, this is one of the things that we've really glossed over in the culture is this idea of what happens when a woman becomes pregnant and just the radical vulnerability that is associated with that, both, during the time while she's pregnant, but then also certainly after the child is delivered. And, this has been what I think what feminism has really tried to eradicate is any kind of what, perceived weakness. But you can see, really in God's plan, the beauty of this, that the woman becomes vulnerable and, together she and the child have to be taken care of. And just the beauty of the husband and the extended family and all of these different ways in which people have to give of themselves in order for a family and a community to flourish. And so I think that, the earliest question that feminists were asking, because they saw the vulnerability as a real problem, and to their credit, this was a major concern. You had 1 in 20 women died from childbirth. I mean, there were some serious things. There's obviously abuse and all of those kinds of things. But to have the solution be that we need to make women like men instead of saying how do we help women in this vulnerable situation become better women, that's really what the beginning of the end and really where they started the movement off and just progressed forward. So we can see how, just this effort to erase that vulnerability is what we're left with today. And just this idea that women aren't supposed to be fertile. And, along with that goes, of course, the family and that tender relationship between mother and child and, all of those aspects of the family that are so vital for any, flourishing culture.
How many women do you think, maybe it's hard to give an exact statistic here, but how many women realize that they have been sold a bill of goods when it's just too late?
Oh, I think so many. I mean, obviously I don't have statistics. I just know more from my personal experience of women telling me, a sort of horror and tragedy in terms of, they can't go back and change things. And I know for a long time I bought into it in terms of what is it that I'm supposed to be doing to be considered a successful woman in the culture today? And, I finally gratefully had the realization that the things that I was doing were actually working against me. And especially when it came to relationships with men and, the kind of ambition that we're told to have and being outspoken and sharp tongued and, all of those kinds of things. And I just saw the negative fruit in my life. And I think, but there's so many of us that just, we don't know an alternate view. And that's the real harm that's been done in the culture is that most women have no idea how much they've been brainwashed into thinking right along step with the feminist ideology that's so pervasive today.
Titles are always fascinating to me. The End of Woman it's one of those titles that captures your imagination immediately. The subtitle as well. I'd like you to elaborate on both.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start with the subtitle. That actually came to me first because I was really trying to just capture what is it that has happened, and that this realization that the whole focus. I mean, if you go to a women's march, it's all about the patriarchy. You can buy products that talk about ending the patriarchy and the future is female and all of this kind of propaganda. And that seems to be an incredibly pithy way to communicate what it is that they are trying to communicate. And, we certainly see this in the new Barbie film. I mean, it's hugely successful. But embedded in that is the doctrine of getting rid of the patriarchy. So but what I wanted to communicate was just that we have done this to ourselves, that this has sort of been this sort of self-implosion that has happened. But the title itself, I mean, this was a work in progress for quite a while with the publisher. But I think, is also just this realization, this is what's happening is women are being erased. And how do we communicate that, that this is happening on a grand scale. So I just feel really grateful that we were able to come up with both a title and a subtitle that I think communicates a lot. The cover, of course, was another really important piece. And that actually happened almost the last few days before it was going to the publisher. We came up with a new cover. So anyway, it was just really beautiful to see how all of these pieces came together to communicate, what you want to communicate in a book, because that obviously doesn't always happen, I think, for authors.
So what happens if the patriarchy disappears?
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing that. I think what we're seeing is The goal in the 1970s was really to try and break down the family through the use of creating immorality in the culture. So Kate Millett, who's was one of a very radical feminist, she wrote the book Sexual Politics. She was on the front cover of Time magazine. Kate had this idea based on the Frankfurt School and all these earlier leftists and Marxists, that if women could promote things like homosexuality, promiscuity, prostitution, all of these kinds of things, that really takes away any kind of power that a man has over his family. It takes away his voice. It really undermines it. And we can see echoes of this in the culture today, where schools are targeting children and circumventing the parents. So that was a very focused effort. And I think what we've seen is men don't know how to react in this culture. They don't know how to behave. They don't know how to treat women. I think so many feel very threatened by kind of this verbal bandsaw that they're afraid to walk into with any kind of discussion about feminism. So as a result, they just sort of throw their hands up and just give up entirely. And I don't fault men for that. I mean, I think that's another thing that I really wanted to do with this book was give men a place where they weren't blamed and could actually start navigating these issues and think through them carefully without feeling like they had to feel guilty by the time they were done with the book. So I think what we are seeing is just this suppression, really, of the masculine in ways that are, incredibly unhealthy and so damaging, because it creates this kind of dual resentment. I mean, women already have this built-in resentment because feminism has told us we're victims, and men are really experiencing firsthand, whether it's in their own relationships or their place of work or in the culture, this kind of prejudice and that they're oppressors and they have to be put down. And so this mutual resentment and wedge between the sexes is obviously not good for anybody and is creating so much discord in all families, but also places of work. And I think men have really been silenced by it.
What is the significance of our inability in Western culture to even define what a woman is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because part of it is it's just political. The idea of, the real definition of woman, obviously the short definition is, adult female human. And the longer one, I think, involves discussion about motherhood, which I think extends not just to biological motherhood, but women are meant to be psychological and spiritual mothers to those around them as well. So I think that the real fear is that if you define a woman, then you're automatically excluding those who might be trans or those who think that they're a woman. And that's the real taboo that has come out of this. And, the feminist movement since the 70s, at least, has really wanted to get rid of gender entirely. So you can see this sort of churning going on very early on. Even Simone de Beauvoir was talking about this in her existential philosophy, of this idea of getting rid of what she and others have called the social construct of gender, and really moving to this direction of, genderlessness, which you can see, went right along with this idea of getting rid of a woman's fertility, getting rid of motherhood. So it's incredibly political. I mean, it's just that nobody wants to offend those who are either feminist or otherwise, who think that if they're a man in a woman's clothing and think they're a woman, that they are a woman. So that's really what's pushing this, what's behind that whole motivation.
Relate the title of the book, The End of Woman, to people like Caitlyn Jenner, to Rachel Levine, to Leah Thomas, to Ricky Valerie Collet. These men, biological men, who are now lauded as the quintessence of what it means to be a woman.
Yeah. No, and I think that's just the remarkable part, is all these women who have fought for the rights of women and for the recognition of women, and suddenly they're lockstep with these men who think that they're women. So yeah, you can really see that what's happening is that for all the efforts that women are making, suddenly we're sort of right back where we started from, because Caitlyn Jenner, of course, was Woman of the Year. You've got Rachel Levine, who's the most decorated, I think, military, or maybe it's just in the I can't remember what her title was, or his title.
She's the first female 4-star admiral.
Thank you. So these areas in which women are still striving and talking about sort of this glass ceiling are now being filled up with trans women. So that's, I think, the fundamental problem. And of course, sports is going to become, and unless states are really willing to make the effort to outlaw boys and girls sports, that's going to be the next area for sure, that women are just going to continually be pushed out just merely by sheer biology. I mean, that's just how it works. So yeah, that's really the trend that we're seeing, is women are just being pushed out by these men who are claiming to be women.
To at the end of women. Talk about the irreparable harm that feminism has done with these ABCs. I think about abortion, birth control, and then casual sex.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge question, and very separate parts. I think you could see in someone like Margaret Sanger that question of how do we make women more like men? How do we allow women to have sexual relations and with sort of similar side effects of what men experience without resulting in a 9-month pregnancy and, of course, a child thereafter. So that was definitely part of the push of the 1900s. But you get in what happened fundamentally is that contraception then allowed couples who are heterosexual couples to start thinking of themselves, their sexual relationships just in terms of pleasure. And so it doesn't take too many decades before people are realizing, well, how is our sexual act any different than what same-sex couples are doing? It's just about pleasure as well. So when you tear out that piece of fertility, it changes the dynamic entirely. And I think, it took quite a while for that to happen, but slowly those things changed. But in addition to that, we know that, abortion has been argued, before the Dobbs decision, of course, that women had to have abortion because their birth control might not work. And so abortion became the backstop of a child who wasn't wanted, it needed to be taken care of, because abortion truly is what feminists and what the national narrative, tells women every day. That is the way that we level the playing field, by allowing women to be like men because they don't have to bear a child. So these kinds of things have really, dramatically changed our sense of ourselves and continually idolized the masculine. You see this sort of in the girl boss language and, all of those different elements. So they have played a really significant role in leading to, the trans movement and leading to same-sex marriage. All of these kinds of things have changed the landscape of the culture significantly.
You make the interesting point in the book that not anyone could write this book. A man really couldn't write this book. Only a woman could write this book, and not just any woman. Yeah. Elaborate on that.
Yeah. So, I was really puzzled. Why doesn't this book exist? Because I found all of this content from this particularly first wave feminism that I had never heard in my life. And I had dug very deeply into second wave feminism. And so I was just amazed, like, why has no one written this book? And of course, like you mentioned, a man couldn't have written the book because it wouldn't have, nobody would read it. I think the feminists would be so quick to say, it's just a patriarchal screed. I also, I'm a stay-at-home mom by and large. That's how I spend most of my time. And I don't have tenure anywhere. I don't have a career that, if I'm canceled from, is going to change our life very much. So I think that was the other reason. I've had people in the past, women approach me and say, how can you get away with writing the books that you have written? And, that's part of it, is I'm not worried about being canceled the way that someone who has been, building a career for many decades is. So I think that's the real advantage of, my position and why I was able to get this book through and out to people. We'll see how long it lasts until it inevitably it will be canceled by someone somewhere. But yeah, I think it's nice to be in this place where I have some relative safety compared to other women who might be interested in the topic.
An incredible statement made in the book that I'd like you to elaborate on as well. The idea that feminism only next to Marxism is the most powerful brand in the world. I mean, this is a brand that has ubiquitous power?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. One of the things that I really wanted to do with this book was make it accessible for people that didn't have any kind of philosophical background, because there is a lot of content on women, but a lot of it is in very academic language and really hard to read and not remotely a page turner. And I wanted this book to be a page turner. I wanted anybody to be able to sit down with it and read the whole thing. So I tried to figure out, how do I talk about feminism in a way that anybody can understand? And of course, we understand brands well. We understand, Nike and Adidas and all of these different ways in which companies rebrand themselves and they present a message, and there's a whole ethos that goes with it. And so it just seemed like feminism was it was much easier to describe it instead of just as an ideology or a philosophical tradition. It was a lot easier to talk about it as a brand, because you can see how it's gone through these different stages where it has rebranded itself, it's reinvented itself. And we see this even, as I mentioned, Barbie already, but Barbie's just another example of feminism rebranding itself to a new audience. So a lot of the feminists that are created so much public policy and public perception that we see today, a lot of them are getting older. Most of them are over 60. And so you can see, a movie like Barbie, which uses a lot of very kind of emotional and irrational argumentation. It uses pink, it uses nostalgia, it uses some tender moments, that this is a way that they're trying to rebrand feminism to appeal to a new generation. Because if you come out, and this is the cleverness, I think, that happened in the 1950s and 60s. Betty Friedan used this masterfully. If a woman, if the Marxists came out and said, we just want you to be Marxist, and just told people on a rational level, go back and read Marx or something, it would never have taken root. And of course, in the Soviet Union, it was done by force through the military. People realized that was not going to happen in the United States, and it had to be done through other means, through advertising in particular. And, the force of media and television, those things were all coming, into their own around the time of feminism's rise. So this is really how they've been so effective in branding it, by using the ways in which women think, and the ways in which women can be convinced very, very easily without using rational argumentation.